So I wanted to begin the presentation with some background on this particular topic. One of the goals of a conference is to educate and also to listen to what you have to say. So hopefully this will be kind of an open discussion. There's many familiar faces here. A number of us have all been around returning to this conference a number of years, and I think we have a certain familiarity with who we are in our roles and our businesses, and I think it's a great opportunity in a public forum to exchange some ideas. So I think this will be very helpful. I prepared some slides to start off with that I think is fundamental, and for those of you that heard me before, I get up on this platform and I say these things as a basic first line. This is where you got to start. This is the position you need to take to understand where we go from here, and that we import all of our fossil fuels. So it's a very big economic drain on our economy, one that's just not recognized so well. But what happens is, once you've got this kind of issue going, it really does permeate your entire economic area. And so it's very important to understand that a fossil energy dollar leaves the state almost immediately, rarely circulates much within the community. The only caveat I would say to that is because we have public power, they've been able to keep rates low, and because it's locally owned and operated essentially by the ratepayers and such, we are benefiting a little bit better on our community recirculation. But for the most part, as you transition to a renewable economy, you'll see that there's a lot more recirculation of those local dollars in the local economy, and that's critical to Nebraska. But we are a state of energy transition like most of the country is right now, and I believe public power has a critical role in this. I really do. And we're unique in the country, of course, because we're the only state that has all public power. And I think this brings an opportunity for private investment to come in strategic places or just develop organically and assist in the rollout and the development of our infrastructure with public power. So we're at this precipice right now where we can take the benefits of a natural monopoly and their economies of scale and put in market innovation and really come up with a robust electrical and energy plan for our future, and eliminate what I call the foreign carbon. You know, we have to import all these feedstocks because we don't have any, and then that money goes out of state, and I think that's a critical issue. So what we're here to do today is to look at this concept of behind the meter, and I basically coined this kind of a definition. It's broadly enough to encompass, yet strong enough to give us a structure and a framework to hold a discussion. And I think it's two important parts to it. There's economic policy involved, and then there's also a trade practice, how you administer it, how you implement it. And I think those are important considerations. First, I just wanted to take a quick look at what does it mean behind the meter. So really, what you take, the grid goes to the meter, and then from that point, it's the individual consumption. So everything from that customer side of the meter is behind the meter. That's what we're talking about. And it doesn't matter if it's a 3K something on your rooftop, or it's a 25K system, or if it's several hundred K adjacent to a large commercial operation. It's all behind the meter. And that's where we start working with our definitions and our understanding. So the economic policy is what's going to become really important, and we don't have any real incentives in the state. In Nebraska, we only benefit from the federal 30% tax credit, and then if you're a business, you get depreciation on top of that. So that is very helpful. In Lincoln, I believe they have still some incentives, which has really stimulated adoption in Lincoln. It's been very favorable, but that's really the only utility that's doing that. We do have net metering. It passed in 2009, and that's at a 25K limit. We can make improvements on that, but it's been proven to be very helpful. It's kind of a policy, it's kind of an incentive. Yes, it's all useful for that. The next steps to look at in some regards for economic policy would be virtual net metering, where we're able to, say, host installation at one location and have it accounted for on someone's bill that their office is at a different location. So that's a very straightforward sort of application, mostly just it's a matter of accounting. And similar with meter aggregation, if you have a farm operation and you have several center pivots over a few miles, a range or such, you could locate everything in one spot, and that would be aggregating all your meters essentially in one thing, and that's just a software, again, accounting change. The other thought regarding economic policy, we really want to take a look at some rate structures, and we want to target and incentivize people for certain practices. Now, public power today will have the irrigators basically run their pumps at night, and so that helps the entire state by shifting the load into the nighttime when you've got plentiful generation and not much demand from anywhere else. So that's one type of a rate structure. There are many more to look at for consideration. The other part here too is locating some businesses next to where the generation is. There's a lot of, for example, wasted steam, excess heat that comes off of the generation of electricity. Perhaps we need to look at other kinds of businesses that need that heat. A greenhouse, for example. They make their own heat in the summer, of course, but in the wintertime, they need added heat in order to grow plants. You might have a classroom or a commercial business that could run off of the waste heat that could be located there. There's a lot of ways able to take our infrastructure as we have it today and add to it and augment its utility. And then one other thing too was learned in Germany that was very important. The German economic policies for solar were such that it really impacted the income streams for the utilities of their country. So the utilities had to become, their role shifted, and they became more managers of a network because there's so many of these large solar installations and they were eroding their revenue streams, but they found that they needed other kinds of services. And the utility was uniquely in position to provide those, and that provided some income streams for them. So on trade practices, I'll just list a few here. But frankly, the trade practice itself is not just the installation, but it's the design, the procurement, the RFP process itself. I think we need to look at that. Since we are public power, we need to look at stimulating our own construction industry within our state and stimulating the financial attributes that come with it. So we can really leverage what assets we have within the state, and it multiplies through on the revenues for the communities themselves and the businesses. So we're looking at a new energy frontier. And one of the things to be considered, and we'll follow up here with Graham's conversations, but net metering, perhaps a 100K limit might be a good location for that. That would be a $200,000 to $250,000 system, but a 100K limit for net metering is just at the point where you start with the taxing of the solar system itself, so as a revenue generator for the state. So that would be a good cutoff point. It also makes sense when you're looking at various commercial businesses and such to do that. Virtual net metering, of course, mentioned earlier, I think that has some real serious benefits on a number of ways, and it's just basically accounting changes. And then, of course, meter aggregation, similar attributes. Some portfolio standards, I don't know. Is that the right measurement tool? Seems to work for other places, but maybe we don't need that here. We're a public power state. Maybe we can go by other metrics. That might be more useful to us. But we also still need to consider that this technology needs a lot of adoption, a lot of new ideas coming forward, and a lot of new practices. So there's going to be some changes there. More improvements in technology that's constantly coming. The inverters are becoming more and more intelligent. The entire battery operation is going to be critical into the future. And I think that some of the next steps roll right up to from smaller applications to the community solar level. So those are just some of the concepts that I wanted to set out there at the beginning. And I was going to now introduce Graham to follow up and then lay out some of the legislative ideas and policies coming forward. So, Graham?
Good morning, everyone. In order to get to all of my wish list, I'm going to have to jump right into this. But I did want to start and just talk about some exciting things that are going on with our business, GC ReVOLT. GC ReVOLT is opened up about 3 years ago, not even. Since then, we put in almost 30 projects. Almost all of them, with the exception of one, have been behind the meter focused. And compared to years 1 and 2 that I opened up the business, this last year, year 3, has been really seeing interest and business pick up very rapidly. You're seeing the trends. They've been happening for the last 5 years, but now I think we're stepping into a new game of involvement in behind the meter and public participation in distributed energy generation. We have done everything from just the regular grid-tied systems, which is the most common, to our first community project in Walt Hill, which will be going online very shortly. And also had, this year, got to install 2 lithium-ion battery systems. We have a few more that are in the works and are now up north looking at a project. It would be our first actual off-grid system with of course, some newer technologies of batteries. So things are evolving rapidly in this state. It's an exciting time to be a part of this conversation, and I thank you very much for being here to learn and move these conversations forward into the future. The first thing that I think is a big point that needs to be discussed is the extension of 25 to 100 kilowatts. I don't believe that there should be any behind the meter discrimination. So once we get over 25 kilowatts in size, it becomes a big gray area, and it kind of goes by utility policy. There's not a lot of consistency. Some places are willing to do a little bit larger system as long as we work together to make sure that we don't put excess energy on the grid. That concern's a real concern. That concern is something that we need to work together and honor. But in other cases, you'll see that once you exceed 25 kilowatts, the whole project, even those first 25 kilowatts, goes back down to an avoided cost payment for the customer. That's something that's become more and more problematic as I start to look to develop more projects above that 25 kilowatt threshold, and it's primarily in that 25 to 100 kilowatt threshold that this is starting to pop up. So I feel that it's time to extend that cap. That's where that 100 kilowatts, about where the rate structure starts to change. It gives more people the ability to play and be a part of the solution here. But they need to be rewarded 1-to-1 on the offset up to 100 kilowatt, should they so choose. As on our farm, and I know that when I'm behind the meter, what we do behind the meter is our business. And that's all we ask, is that we keep it that way. But there has to be a great relationship with the utility, and we have to be following their guidance to make sure we don't oversize these things. And that conversation is really key in this whole situation. But I think that's an easy one that we can be able to manage moving forward. And as a matter of fact, with most of the utilities that we work with, those conversations, are very easy to come across and pay dividends. So that's the 25 to 100 kilowatt extension. It's time to start to really set benchmarks per utility about setting renewable energy goals. It's just literally setting and establishing goals that we can grow. So the 1% cap under the current net metering bill, we're exceeding that in several areas already. It's not causing grid reliability issues because we're working closely with the utilities when we do this. So we need to follow utility guidance on this, there's no doubt about it, but we need to be able to, as utilities and as businesses trying to help get more of this infrastructure out, we need to be able to exceed that 1% and know that there's not going to be problems. So today, definitely asking the utility players to work with us on this piece so that we can set benchmarks, so we can get a little bit more of what is proven to be a booming industry in place here in Nebraska and moving forward. Also, I think that it's time to start looking at benchmarks for battery storage. And I think we need to also have some standards or some goals on what we're trying to do with battery storage moving into the next decade. And I think it's a good place to start. As I told you earlier, people are really interested in the lithium-ion batteries. They're just going to be coming down in cost from here on out. Almost every conversation that I have, at some point, the battery comes up. So this is something that now is the time to talk about this. Now is the time to set some benchmarks or some goals for batteries to complement the behind-the-meter solar systems. Other things that I think we're stepping into that's really exciting is smart meter implementation. The ability for us to be able to produce energy at a lower cost or just shave some of the most expensive energy. This will help us all grow together to be more knowledgeable about what this looks like. And it would create an enhanced relationship between the utility and the customers and the developers. We will all be able to learn more, and we'll all be able to ensure that as we step into this new world of more renewable energy, distributed renewable energy implementation, that we're in a good place to do that. Some other pieces of this that I think will come up in the legislature this year is equity in rates. So, of course, recently there was controversial 2015 conversation in Omaha where more emphasis went to fixed rates, which typically fell on low-income users. We need to take a deeper dive into the rate structures all across the board and make sure that they're treating everybody fairly. Just a small piece of this, that I think calls for an analysis, but just a small piece of this that I think is really, really innovative idea would be for folks that are doing these behind-the-meter systems and that are using the net metering program for the credits that are net metered. Folks would have the option to actually put some of those credits in a piggy bank, so some low-income users that are paying a little bit higher rates would be able to offset that with excess solar energy production. It's a brilliant idea. It was run by me recently, and it's just one piece, I think, of that we can build on an analysis of what the rate structure is, but it also is a driver for renewable energy, and it helps us do the right thing or have the option to do the right thing for other people with excess energy that's going back onto the grid. And I think in order to kind of save time, that's kind of where I wanted to stop. Maybe I should touch on virtual metering and aggregation really quickly. So virtual net metering, we have a lot of people that are wanting to be able to access renewable energy and do their part, I guess. But a lot of people don't have an area that's feasible. So virtual net metering, we produce energy and people are able to purchase it even though it's down the road just a little bit. It's a great concept. It would help speed up the deployment of these renewables. And there's been some really, really great talks the last couple of years in the legislature on this as well. One of the concerns was accounting from utility to utility. And some of the concerns are some of the wheeling costs that could come up the further that we get away with a system like this. I would propose that we take a step and do it within utility boundaries. Let's learn about this within our own utilities, and then let's see if we can find a way to be able to build upon this in years after we understand what the accounting and what the actual back and forth might actually look like. But we definitely all deserve some experience in this part. Some folks are already doing it in different ways, and of course it is popular in other states too. So virtual net metering is a great opportunity to once again get more people involved in renewable energy development at this time, and it's a great fit for getting more of the public involved with public power in the development and formation of distributed renewable energy. And of course, aggregation. An organization that I'm part of called the Nebraska Farmers Union had proposed a few years ago to start looking at all these different areas that may not be feasible on farms. So on our farm, we have a few irrigation systems. It's not feasible to put those solar panels in the middle of the field. We'd like to be able to set it right on our farm where we do have a lot of feasible space and be able to aggregate those other meters and use that energy for that. That's what aggregation is. Once again, there was some concern with the utilities in the legislative session about accounting back and forth between utility boundaries. If we could just simply take a step within each utility and learn more about this, I think that would be great progress, and I think it would be very helpful. That for this year, there's some other things that go beyond the meter, I think, that I'd really like to see, but let's get some more structure in place. Let's be able to set some goals, and let's just make sure that a booming industry that's on the verge of booming in this state is not being overregulated. Currently, I feel that I'm restricted from being able to do some very basic things. Let's just have these conversations, make sure everybody's on the same page, protect the reliability for the utilities, follow the expert guidance, but let's take these steps forward so that we can open up this industry wide open and become a leader with this great natural resource that we have. Thank you.
I just was invited to come here and talk, and I think that I was like the bottom of the barrel for utility folks, so bear with me. There's a couple of things I want to visit about and kind of related back to the net metering law, and I think it's important to look at the history of that. And first of all, I'm not here to say the utilities are right and Graham's wrong or anything like that. I just wanted to give you a little background. When the 25 kW cap was put into place, there was a desire for folks to be able to net meter. And there were utilities that were against the concept entirely. So the cap came about as kind of a negotiation saying, hey, utility, you have to take this net metering if it's below 25 kW. So the 25 kW isn't some magic number, that's just the number that it took to get started so that y'all could net meter. And that said, it's not up to me to determine. I know right now that each utility can decide if they want to take on a 100 kW, they can. There's nothing that says that they can't, but what the law says is if it's less than 25, you have to take it. That just as a distinction, just for clarification. And you know, when it comes to renewable energy goals, I think that all the utilities have them. Now, whether that needs to be in law, that's a determination for the legislature and a conversation that, in my mind, falls outside of the aspect of behind the meter generation. Whenever we talk about our percentages or renewable energy as from a utility perspective, we don't necessarily count the net metering, and the reason why is that that generation belongs to the customer owner or the member or whatever that we want to call them. So that isn't necessarily credit for the utility. In Cuming's case, we have one project that isn't a behind the meter scenario. It's an 87 kW anaerobic digester set up on a hog farm. Now, that has a different rate than solar or wind because it's dispatchable. In other words, if I need that 87 kW, I can call the operator and say, hey, give me all 87, I need help on that circuit. And he can do that anytime that I need it. That is a difference between wind and solar, and without the battery, without the next step, if I need energy at 9 o'clock at night, I can't get it from solar. If I need energy on a calm, cool morning, I can't get it from wind. And that's just a distinction, again, and that's part of how the avoided cost calculations come in. It's part of how we figure value relative to each product. And that's why we still rely on nuclear and coal and natural gas, because they're always available. Hydroelectric is the best thing there ever was. And, you know, we could throw another dam or two on the Missouri, and we'd have a lot of our renewable needs met at that point. But there's fish problems and farm ground problems, and it all takes a conversation. And I think that's really the key. Battery storage, I think, is coming. We have one customer on Cuming system that actually worked with Graham. He's got, I believe, 5 kW or so on the roof and another about 6 in battery, is that right? Somewhere in there. It's a great little system. I was at his house. He loves to show it off. He comes down to the office. Hey, man, look what I did today. He's got it on his iPhone. And he's a retired fellow with plenty of time, and it's his baby. You know, he loves that thing. So come on out, Chet. You got to see this. So I go out there, look at his system. We're sitting there looking on his computer. And as we're talking, his wife's trying to live her life and ignore the energy geeks in the corner. She goes down, starts a load of wash. Well, it was kind of cool because the dryer kicks on. It's a 6 kW load. His solar's putting out 3.8 or something like that. All of a sudden, you see this big spike on the meter side. Then the battery picks in and just smoothed it right out. He's only taking 0.79 kW from the utility from me, and the rest of it's right there for him. The other thing that he did that was brilliant is just something to bear in mind when you think about batteries. He's got his set up so the battery's only charged from the solar and never charged from the grid. If you do it the other way, your battery's constantly getting drained, constantly getting used. I don't know what that does to a lithium-ion battery, I really don't, but it's worth a thought. Are you overworking it? Is there another way? How this gentleman has his set up, I think, is very smart. So, anyway, I talked about dispatchability. That's one of the things. I think that the low-income idea is a great idea. If that's how folks want to participate, I don't know how you'd mandate that, if that's a voluntary program, but you know, if folks want to help out on that social aspect, I think those are great ideas. The virtual net metering right now is being used in places in the state. It's kind of how the utility model works for a solar garden or a solar farm or a community solar. There's all kinds of names for it. Essentially, the city or the utility puts in a couple of megawatts or whatever. They sell off a panel, so to speak, and that usage is then virtually net metered to the individual's account. It can work. The issue becomes, as Graham mentioned, across utilities. And, you know, right now the statute's silent on it, so therefore it can be done, but it's up to each individual utility whether it will be done. And you get into the ownership aspect and all that, and that's a whole other conversation for another day. Aggregation that Graham mentioned, having your solar in one spot and spreading it to several meters. The biggest issue from the utility side is, under the current law, we aren't allowed to set a net metering rate. The way the law reads, they have the same rate. So if you're residential net metered, you have the same rate as residential next door that doesn't have net metering. One of our driving factors in the law is that we need to set rates that are fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. The non-discriminatory aspect, in my opinion, is that if you have an account and your neighbor has an account and they are the same, then they should be on the same rate. Honestly, net metering is not the same as non-net metering. And until we have some ability to set rates, I don't think that aggregation is going to go anywhere, because there's the wheeling aspect. How much is that worth? Is there a study needs to take place? And so anyway, that's, I think, the struggle right now that the utilities have with this piece, is that I don't have the option for the half dozen or so that I have that are net metered. They're on the same exact rate as everybody else in that class. That's why OPPD was looking at fixed costs, and it does affect other people. What we don't want is a cost shift. In other words, if I don't want solar, I shouldn't have to pay for my neighbors. That's the issue. So, and I'll leave with one more statement that I think is very important, and I mention this every time it comes up in terms of a conversation. The absolute worst place to have a conversation on any of these issues is in a hearing room in Lincoln. And it always comes up, you know, a senator will say, well, I wanted to start this conversation, or I wanted to have this conversation. Man, it's an ugly place to have a conversation. The proponents, they're really over here, and the opponents are really over here, and we don't get to talk to each other. We just get to go up there and just, I believe this, I hate this. And it's it's a knockdown, drag out, knuckle busting, terrible thing. I think the place to have a conversation is at the coffee shop, at here, when there's no senators in the room. There might be a candidate or two out there. If you're out there, just ignore me. But seriously, that's the worst place to have the conversation. Because when it comes up, the proponents bring their information, the opponents bring the opposite information, and it's just then up to the committee to decide whether to carry it forward. So I just offer that as free advice. It's worth what you paid for it. But if you do want to have a conversation on net metering with the utilities, call the utilities. And for that matter, if you're starting a project and you want to get it right-sized, the key to net metering, the sweet spot of net metering, is if you've got a 10 kW house, don't put in more than 10 kW. You're going to lose money hand over fist on that overage. The avoided cost, average cost is not going to be where you pay off. It's on that retail kilowatt. So having the conversation with your utility early on in the process is absolutely key to making sure that they know what you're doing. We get all the paperwork right. We get the state involved. Everybody that needs to be involved can be at the table then. So we're not surprised. You're not waiting for us to program a meter or whatever. Then secondarily, we can help you by showing, hey, this is how much you use in July, this is how much you use in January, this is what you can expect to net. And if you want to know what a solar will do in West Point, go to ccppd.com. We've got a 24.9 up on the roof of the office building. It does fine except for when it's cloudy, I've noticed. And at night, doesn't produce anything anyway. So I know I'm being a little silly, but that's kind of what I had, and I'd be more than glad to answer questions. I think Michael's going to take over now.
Thank you, Chet. So what I wanted to do was just open this up for some dialogue between us. We've got some expertise here. We have a lot of expertise in the audience, too. So there's a number of public power officials here. There's in various capacities, and we have a lot of people interested in investing in solar and a number of solar installers here. So if for those of you that have a question, you're thinking of something, please come up. And I don't know if the mic's on. We'll have to test with that, but we can do that forward. One of the things, while we're waiting for a question, hint, I wanted to just mention that one of the few incentives we do have in Nebraska is actually our loan program with the Nebraska Energy Office. It's a fabulous program, a great idea. We hope that it will be continued under the new interim director. We'll keep going on it and add some more resources so that they can get more throughput on the projects, because it is really our only type of incentive in the state. We don't have rebates per se other than Lincoln, and this particular loan program is a way for people to help fund their systems, and it's very important. So I look forward to that. Yes?
Good morning, I'm Travis Kepler with GRNE Solar here in Lincoln, and I think the 100 kW is an excellent goal that would cover the majority of the state. My question kind of pertains to what Chet started to mention. We've done work in other states where they allow up to 120% of your actual consumption, where you view it on a basis by basis. Do you think that's a good alternative above 100 kW, or does every system need to be reviewed on that, or is that something we could add on to 100 kW is basic, but above that, if you're under 120% of your annual consumption, that is reasonable? If you do 100 kW, it's only going to save you $15,000 or $16,000 a year. There's lots of manufacturing facilities that use that every month. So I just wondered if that was an alternative or an addition to the 100 kW.
So I understand your question for sure. You're asking if, say, there was a 100 kW load, that they could go to maybe 120. Yeah, I can't speak for all the utilities, but I think conversations like that are what need to take place. At the end of the day, again, if you're talking commercial, it's kind of a different animal, and the reason it is because they have taxes and so on, and if they aren't making money on their solar panel, they can write that off on their taxes, and money shifts and it does what it does. On the residential level, it's kind of a different critter, and I don't know if at the end of the day, and this is just a crazy idea, this is Chet talking, this is not NREA talking, anyway. I don't know if maybe there needs to be a bill for residential and a bill for commercial. And maybe the rules are different. It's just a thought. And because for a homeowner, if they need 10 and they put in 20, they don't, they can write off that on their taxes maybe, but it's going to take 20 years for that thing to pay off versus 4 years if it's right sized. And that's the issue at the end of the day, is I always think, it's your money, and as public power, we care about folks. That's kind of the cool thing about working in public power versus working for an investor-owned. I don't want to see anybody spending money that they ought not at the end of the day. So, no, that's fair enough. And I think that part of that needs to be a conversation that happens somewhere that's not in the hearing room. So.
In Burt County Public Power District, where we've exceeded the 1%, we found it really easy to work with the manager, Dick Ray, over there in order to follow his guidance on sizing, which is always pretty close to what we calc should probably be going, online. I don't know if we need to do the 120%. It's not a bad piece for conversation, but I tend to believe that it can be very simple. Expand 25 to 100. You don't need to mandate any 100 that goes in. It should be sized appropriately. I think that can be determined by the utility. It's just we shouldn't be reverting back to avoided costs for even the first 25 kilowatt when we go over, because that's not fair. That's not the behind the meter offset that the customer deserves. So if we expand it up, we eliminate that avoided cost payback in law for the first 25 kilowatts, so they get full credit for that, and then work with the utility on anything from 25 to 100. I think it could work out very well, be very fair, and it seems pretty simple.
Right. Okay. Ron.
Yeah. Ron Rose with NPPD. Could you comment on, do you see net metering as kind of a virtual battery for a solar system? And then in the future, as battery prices come down, would battery storage then kind of negate the need for net metering then at some time in the future?
Interesting question. Okay, so is the grid at a virtual battery for the solar owner? And I would say effectively, yes, it is. Does that have an impact on the grid? It's virtually immeasurable at this point. Now, if we are in Hawaii, where you have microgrids, that's a whole different story. They've actually constructed battery system to absorb the excess PV during the day. And they found that they actually needed two types of battery systems. One battery will take the high level hit when it pumps and motors are getting started, and that has an impact on the grid that you can see readily. The other is the long-term battery storage, where you just have more of a load. And the issue there is that you cannot turn coal generation up or down very quickly, or diesel, or any kind of generation really. It's not that responsive. So you got to have some kind of a battery as a buffer system. And that's the impact there, but it's a microgrid, it's an island. We're a large grid. And so if you put a number of solar systems on, you're not going, particularly for residential, you're not going to see much there. As an aggregate, yes, you will start to see it if we have large penetration of the market. But then that raises other questions and other kinds of engineering considerations. Do we want to add battery systems to it? At this present time, and I think in the foreseeable future, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact. I really don't. But I'm not a utility person, so I'm going to carry on with that thought.
Okay. Well, first, I hope we never get to Hawaii where they pay the 40 cents kilowatt hour. That'd be pretty rough. But anyway, so in my opinion, the grid is the battery for the solar system as it sits. It also conditions the load and does a number of things that helps the solar producer out. So there's value in the grid. Mm-hmm. And I think most folks are going to say, yeah, the grid's worth something, even if they're producing more than they need. So the reality of it is that we're taking the excess during the time it's produced, and then we're there at night. And if it gets cloudy for 2 weeks, or snow lays on and it's 2 feet thick, we're there. And so that's a factor. It does act like a battery. The funny thing about batteries right now, and it's probably something that should be addressed if the net metering law is opened up, there's nothing in the law about battery storage right now. So how we accept that, the value of that, is truly up to each utility right now, because the law being silent means essentially we don't, with the Davis, we don't have to take it, so to speak. But that's always been my opinion, Ron, is that the grid really does kind of act like a battery, for lack of a better way of saying it.
There's one exception, I think, and that's because that's with the exception that for the best national security, for more people to be more untouched and continue to maintain resiliency and power up their place on an individual scale. The grid currently, just with the grid-tied system, doesn't offer that backup, that protection. And that's where the batteries are going to be vital in the future. We hear about cyber attacks and we hear about these different things, and we need to be more focused and cognizant on that piece of it in order, whether it's a blizzard or the worst comes to worst, that we're protected and our communities still function and our people in our communities still have the ability to maintain the day-to-day. So batteries, to me, give us that ability for security. Utility scale batteries also do, and then the other difference is we can more control what rates we're paying and what rates we're not. We don't have to always be paying those peak rates anymore when we do that. But national security, I believe it's urgent that we move past the grid idea into the new game of batteries, both at the farm residence level, but also at the utility scale, so that we can take more control of that. And that is the advantage to the battery over the grid as a so-called battery.
Sure. Wayne?
Yeah, just a quick statement here, and I realize we're out of time, but
okay.
we have interconnection systems. We've installed probably half the solar in the state of Nebraska on both sides of the meter. And one of the things that I'd like to just point out within the state statute, the way that it's currently written, it pits the solar developer against the utilities, and that really needs to be changed. And the thing that Chet brought up, Chad, about called you Chad. Chet, I did call you Chad. No. But the thing that Chet brought up out there is a perfect example. When you've got a guy that lives on one side of the street and a guy living on the other side of the street, this guy puts solar in, the guy on the other side of the street gets to pay for all of the infrastructure and everything that goes on for that guy that just put solar in. And until you fix that problem and get it so that the utilities are actually wanting to work and they realize the value of it, you're going to have to come up with, here you go, with the avoided cost, right? You're going to have to come up with a number for avoided cost through the legislature and fix that number so that makes sense. Because outside of doing that, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to pit the solar developers against the utilities every time. And so we've got to fix that. So the conversation you're talking about having, Chet, needs to happen, and I agree with you, not on the floor out there, but it does need to happen in a forum where people can start discussing this, and you've got to get that avoided cost number drilled down to where it makes sense. Because truthfully, solar works underneath of the retail rate. I mean, it does. I mean, and you can get it in, and developers can get it installed in there, and we can put that in for those guys, and it can help the utilities. But we don't have to be against each other. And right now, the legislature, the way that it's written, pits us against each other. And that's why you have this problem that we got going on.
Sure. Good point, Wayne. Thank you. Rich? Yes.
Very briefly, I think our community solar is designed, NPPD, so there is not cost shift. It's really not virtual net
Exactly.
metering.
Right.
So we
I agree.
recover all the distribution costs, and I think that is a big issue. And we also have a rate structure for above 25. It's called simultaneous buy-sell, and
Yes.
many solar developers have taken advantage of that. So
Yes.
from our perspective, I think this is a local control issue. What each utility wants to do, I think, is good, and have that discussion. And if there's a majority within that utility wants to change it, talk to your board.
Right, and I think that's a valid point, and thank you for bringing those two up. I omitted those and meant to include that, and that is a buy-sell agreement. So if you go over the 25K, if you're planning on that kind of investment, you can use this arrangement. It's already structured, it's already been sort of contracted out, and so it's just a matter of negotiating some terms, and I think that's really straightforward. This also brings up another point, and we are out of time, I'm sorry, but maybe we need, as far as conversations, start something like a podcast or something on a monthly or weekly basis or bi-weekly, so that we can get a number of people can all tune in to the same spot, and then we can start airing some of these thoughts and ideas out. And you really have to have various viewpoints, not just from the consumer, owner, generator, whatever, to the utility themselves. You've got to have a lot of different viewpoints and invite an academic to come in and give a presentation on some aspects of it, or a technologist. I think that would be helpful. So maybe we should have some thoughts on setting something like that up amongst one of the organizations. I thank you very much for your time. This has been a very good experience. Enjoy it. Enjoy yourself.